Hey Internet, this is Julian Sanchez here with your weekly news roundup for Friday, May 16th, 2025. Noah, what is in the news?
Well, one of the first pieces in the news it was a breaking story that landed just yesterday, May 15th, by Natalie Alms at NextGov. If you haven't been following Natalie there, she's an amazing reporter who's been on Doge from the jump. And some internal documents were sent to NextGov, or they obtained them in some way, showing the initial metrics of Doge's massive anti-fraud campaign at the Social Security Administration, or SSA. And since they installed those new anti-fraud checks over the phone, they were very much concerned that the phone was a high proxy of potential fraud. Only two claims out of the initial 110,000 claims over the phone were found to be likely fraudulent. Again, that's significantly less than 1%. And the claims isn't even that those two are fraudulent, just that they have a high probability of being fraudulent. Again, there was zero evidence that the phone was actually a vector of incredible fraud at the SSA. There are many other different places you can go. They made a big deal about instituting a new 3-day check on claims over the phone for this additional fraud checking, which is not finding any fraud. And as a consequence of that 3-day delay, on average, the entire system's processing has slowed by a quarter, by 25%.
Yeah. And this is important because some Doge engineers made public claims that they thought something like 40% of people
Yeah.
calling to change their direct deposit information were engaged in fraud, which I mean, just kind of common sense should tell you that is a wildly implausible number. But that claim was nevertheless parroted by Elon Musk and even by Vice President J.D. Vance. And so 2 out of 110, the Daily Beast did the math there and said it's okay, not 40%, but 0.0018%. And this is a story that frankly calls to mind a point Kara Wheeler made during one of our very first WatchCats podcast episodes, which is if you want 100% security in a computer system, it's very easy. You unplug it and you lock it in a safe. It's just that a system that is 100% secure in that way is not very useful. And I think the same sort of goes for government operations when you're trying to establish security against fraud, which is, well, you can get to zero fraud probably if just don't make any payments or don't make any changes. The question you always have to ask is, well, what is the trade-off? What is the plausible quantity of fraud that is being experienced, and whatever that quantity is, how much inconvenience and delay and potential delay in payments are you willing to impose on legitimate recipients in order to get that fraud from 0.0018% to 0%?
Yeah. And let's be clear. Financial targeting, financial scams of the elderly is a real, persistent, and growing problem. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. The vector by which that exploitation happens is rarely with an SSA, an entity with with a B, billion-dollar customer service budget, right? If the federal government wants to help eliminate fraud and exploitation of the elderly and their finances, there's a lot of different ways to do it. SSA can be a great partner there, but just instituting a 3-day delay on processing of those claims with the phone ain't it.
Yep. And so, based on the internal memo NextGov received, it looks like it's possible that the new fraud checks that Doge implemented may not be long for this world. Also in the news, first of all, we've got sort of an update on something we talked about previously. We discussed what some called Doge's zombie contracts. That is, contracts that had been canceled, but then they realized actually we need these. We can't do this in house, and they had to be resurrected. So the New York Times, which had initially reported out that story, is now reporting that the infamous wall of receipts at the Doge website has been corrected to remove some of those zombie contracts that were counted as savings. However, CBS also reports that despite having been sort of caught out for these errors many times, Doge continues to push inaccurate and misleading claims on that wall of receipts. In one case, they noted Doge counted the $38 million being saved by a contract being canceled, but reporters then called up the contractor, the provider of that contract, and what they said was, well, actually, what happened was the scope of work on the contract changed and it was renegotiated. So, in place of that original $38 million contract, there is instead a $41 million contract. So, Doge counted the savings of the old $38 million contract that had been superseded, but did not, add into the calculus. Well, actually, it was just replaced by a similar contract for the same work, valued at 41 million. And perhaps in order to help folks fact check Doge's wall of receipts, CBS has also created a pretty useful looking resource, which is a searchable list and index of Doge eliminated contracts and leases. So if anyone wants to do a little bit of their own sleuthing, that is a resource at CBS that you can check out.
Meanwhile, across town on the Hill, Representative Jared Moskowitz, the first and I think perhaps only even Democrat member of the Doge Caucus, is reporting its funeral, and he ain't attending. The Doge Caucus, quote, is dead, in a story from Politico on the 13th. Quote from Representative Moskowitz: the Doge Caucus is dead. It's defunct. We haven't met in months. We've only had 2 total meetings in 5 months. We didn't get involved in anything happening at Doge. Elon was in charge of it. We were involved zero, zilch, nada. Musk did it all on its own. This, of course, means, Julian, we, in making this podcast, have spent more time thinking about Doge than Congress.
Yeah.
Than the caucus itself that was supposed to be focused on these issues. But Julian, have they considered a plan B or plan C?
Yeah, I mean, so a thing we've again discussed in previous news roundups is Doge is moving very quickly, making a lot of sort of nominal cuts, but none of that really is bank savings until Congress actually reflects that in appropriations. And as they're discovering that Congress is not actually that enthusiastic to make even a fraction of the kind of cuts that Doge has implemented, they are considering apparently challenging the constitutionality of the Anti-Impoundment Act. So this is a federal statute that essentially says, unsurprisingly, when Congress appropriates funds, allocates funds from the Treasury to be spent on particular things, the executive branch cannot just indefinitely sit on those funds and not use them for the thing Congress ordered. There are a bunch of lawyers in this administration who have a very broad view of executive power. So one of the things on their menu of options is an effort to take to the courts and try and say, no, actually, once the funds are appropriated, the power of the presidency and of the executive is so broad that, in fact, federal statute can't constrain the executive in this way from exercising their discretion. And already, indeed, it looks like they are finding lots of ways to effectively shut down parts of the government that are established by Congress. A story in the Washington Post from the 11th looks at the hidden ways Doge are shutting down parts of the U.S. government by effectively just starving them of funds, refusing to dole out congressionally appropriated funds. So they note that at the EPA, research at 11 laboratories has basically stopped because new lab purchases have not been approved. At the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, weather forecasting work is slowed to a crawl because the Commerce Secretary now must personally sign off on most of the contracts and grants. And at Social Security, employees are running out of pens, paper, and printer toner because Doge has placed a $1 spending limit on government credit cards. And if you want a deeper dive from the New York Times, they have a piece from the 15th titled "The Weather Service Had a Plan to Reinvent Itself. Did Doge Stop It?" that takes a closer look at the United States Weather Service, which is kind of, I think, admittedly in serious need of modernization, in which the new acting head had developed a plan for modernization, but that is being significantly hampered by serious reductions in the workforce demanded by Doge.
So you're saying the federal government doesn't control the weather, Julian?
No, as we all know, that's the space lasers.
Ah, the space lasers. Yeah, that's probably DOT. Well, interesting enough, on that topic, we now have vast swaths of the United States that have no meteorologist in charge of those areas. Most critically, there are parts of Western Florida and Southeastern Texas that are hurricane prone. They don't have a chief meteorologist in charge. New York, Long Island, Big Gap. Huge amount of the Farm Belt in Kansas. Basically, the federal government's telling them to go kick rocks. And the entire state of Kentucky, literally the entire state of Kentucky,
Wow.
there is not a single chief meteorologist.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, potentially. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the economics of weather forecasting, but something that came up in our conversation with Jessica Riedel of the Manhattan Institute in our most recent podcast was, one of the things you have to think about is whether in making cuts you're being penny wise and pound foolish, whether you are saving a little bit of money by eliminating functions that in the long run would have saved you more. I think one case in point there might be having warning in a timely way of extreme weather events is something that can prevent a lot of destruction. So if you don't get notified as early about a hurricane incoming and there's less time to take countermeasures and to protect assets, is that going to end up costing you more than the salary of the meteorologists who were working to provide that warning?
Absolutely. As we move on to other forecasting of potential conflicts of interest on the
Yep.
horizon, more at Treasury, a glaring red flag that the Treasury Doge team discloses multiple bank stock holdings. We got Tom Cruise, who not only kept working at his private sector company while leading up the
I think, I
Treasury
think
Doge
it's I think
team.
it's Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is a
Tom
different guy.
Kraus, thank you. Tom Cruise, the lesser known little brother of Tom Cruise. Yes, Tom Kraus has been working at Doge, reported hundreds of thousands of dollars in a wide range of financial companies, many of which are regulated entities under Treasury. Two of his other Treasury Doge team members, Todd Newman and Linda Whitridge, also reported owning shares of, oh, what do you know, Intuit, the parent
Yep.
company of TurboTax, and one of the chief lobbyists against IRS Direct File, the free program made by the IRS to allow you to file your taxes for free and directly to the government without an intermediary.
Yeah. So TurboTax and H&R Block and all these tax preparation services have for years, I mean, really decades now, lobbied very hard against IRS doing anything that would make it easier for people to just directly file their taxes on the IRS website rather than paying for some outside service to do that for them. And so it was finally under the Biden administration that a kind of pilot program was launched that said, for kind of almost any other government function, you would expect that if you have to submit a form, if you have to fill out an application, that's something you would expect to be able to do directly on that government agency's website. So finally, they were experimenting with just letting people go to the IRS website and file their taxes. But of course, that is now being mothballed, and apparently, in part, at the direction of people with a direct financial interest in the companies that have been lobbying to prevent that form of competition. But that is not all. We note we talked to you previously about Gavin Kleiger, the very young Doge staffer in charge of gutting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who had significant stock holdings in companies regulated by CFPB, and which CFPB ethics rules prevent their own officials from holding stock in. ProPublica has unearthed some information about another person with a role at CFPB, Elon Musk's employee Chris Young, who is making an unknown amount of money at one of Elon Musk's companies, somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million, according to his ethics disclosure, and who also is in a lead role at CFPB, helping to dismantle that agency. Again, That is an agency that regulates companies like Tesla and X, formerly Twitter. And one of the people involved in dismantling it is directly on the payroll of Elon Musk, whose companies are the target of that regulation. Incidentally, some of the firings at CFPB have been paused by courts. CBS News had an interesting profile of a fraud victim who has joined the lawsuit against Doge and the government and the efforts to shut that company down or shut that agency down.
Yeah, and as we have seen, it's not just unregulating entities that are in the way of private sector interests for Elon Musk and his allies. It's also using the U.S. government and the Trump administration as business development for his companies. For example, we've seen a lot of activity around Starlink at things like the FCC, Department of Transportation, FAA, and now also from ProPublica, we're also seeing pressure from Trump and Musk for entities in Africa to accede to this requirement. In recent months, according to them, senior State Department officials in both Washington and on the ground in Gambia have coordinated with Starlink executives to coax, lobby, and browbeat at least 7 Gambian government ministers to help Musk, records and interviews show. And one of those cabinet officials told ProPublica that his government is under maximum pressure to yield. They also have a quote from a former high-level State Department official in, of all things, the George W. Bush administration. Christopher Harrison said, if this was run by another country, we absolutely would call this corruption because it is corruption.
Yep.
Telling it like it is.
And that is a case where communications ministers in Gambia have apparently been delaying or not acting as quickly as Starlink would like on approvals for Starlink to operate there, and essentially several Gambian ministry officials are quoted saying to the effect they felt that they not just that they were personally being pressured, but that intimations were made that U.S. aid and grants that have, of course, already been severely reduced could go away entirely if they don't play ball and help out Starlink. One glimmer of a bit of good news here is that an appeals court has authorized a lawsuit to move forward by a watchdog group called CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, that had sued Doge, is seeking discovery on its operations. So, we're finding out a lot about these potential conflicts of interest. This is a fairly limited ruling, but it is going to permit to proceed a suit that will try and sort of dislodge some documents about Doge's operations and how it is proceeding. So, a glimmer of hope for more transparency in the offing.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why this is even, a thing is, and this was always an issue in government, is one of the ways you can, in general, as a class, get records out of public review that you make in government is by saying that they're advisory, they're pre-decisional. Oh, people used to be pressured to put the words pre-decisional on everything as if the discussion to get to a decision wasn't as important as the decision itself.
Yep.
So this is a very great ruling in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yep.
We got some one-offs hot off the press over from Ars Technica. An FCC commissioner has written an op-ed saying it's time for Trump to Doge the FCC. This was echoed in a similar opinion from Daily Caller by Nathan Symington and Gavin Wax.
Well, that is the original. So the Daily Caller thing is the original op-ed, and then Ars Technica has some analysis of it. And this is the Republican FCC commissioner saying, the FCC really needs the Doge treatment. He's talking about getting rid of, or at least significantly curtailing, the Universal Service Fund, which tries to provide broadband internet in rural areas. And this perhaps links to our earlier block of stories on conflicts of interest, because one of the things he's recommending is, look, we don't need to spend money on wiring up rural areas. They can just use broadband access like Elon Musk's Starlink.
What do you know? I was going to say, I thought that would be an interesting either position change for Ars Technica from an editorial position, but maybe it's tongue-in-cheek.
Yes. Also, next sort of one-off story here, we have NPR has a report on the ongoing conflict between the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which of course provides a lot of the funding for NPR, and Doge. Trump has tried to fire several members of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's board. CPB is, of course, what funds a lot of local NPR stations, what funds things like PBS, and of course, it's set up as an independent agency. So they attempted to install a Doge team at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and unsurprisingly, they're arguing, hey, CPB was very explicitly set up by statute as not a government agency, as an independent entity, precisely because it is trying to fund lots of news programming and educational programming. They didn't want it to be under direct political control. And so this is kind of a pattern we've seen with a series of other think tanks and independent agencies that are sort of established by statute, but are not really supposed to be part of the executive branch. The Trump administration, sort of wielding the cudgel of unitary executive theory, is saying, no, we don't care if you tried to set this up as an independent agency. It is established by the government. It is effectively under the control of the executive branch.
Over on the IRS, we have a situation that we've been following for a while now, which is that overall, to understand a whole set of Doge's actions, you have to understand they are trying to make a database that will cover the vast majority of the civilian government. One of the key agencies and data they need to do this is at the IRS. One of the ways they've been doing that at the IRS is by eliminating any technical talent that could potentially stop them or even report out in a more detailed way on what they are doing. So, for example, just on the tech side of the house, the IRS's Transformation Strategy Office that focuses on these technical issues was killed off 50 IT executives replaced on admin leave in March. The agency's chief information officer stepped down in April. So now the House oversight, specifically the Democrats, are getting involved. They're asking for investigations on any modernization plans Doge has made for IRS systems. In addition, looking into controls the group has put in place to limit access to taxpayer data. They're also seeking specifics on idea sharing agreements between the IRS, Treasury, and Department of Homeland Security, including whether such deals account for a law that prohibits the release of taxpayer data absent a court order. There's a preliminary briefing to Congress on those findings being requested by May 29th. Nothing that this article and many other articles around the space is focusing on is a key Peter Thiel-backed company called Palantir that has been in government since I came into government and has been slowly but surely expanding its portfolio. I think at some point in the near future, we may have to find a guest who can help us do a deep dive on Palantir and what their technology entails. But if you are familiar with Lord of the Rings, yeah, it does that. Why you would name your company after a tool of the ultimate evil figure in the greatest fantasy novel ever written, well, you'd have to ask them.
Yeah. So here on the assignment desk for Doge, here's something they could be looking into. We began our news roundup with a couple stories about fraud. It's sort of a pattern also. Fraud allegations that under scrutiny are not holding up. So fake non-fraud that Doge is finding or claiming to find and then having to admit they didn't really find. But over at NBC, there is a write-up on a new report from a private sort of security analysis firm called Socure that found that government programs sort of across the federal government are being essentially attacked by international criminal groups from China, Russia, Egypt, Poland, among others, and that up to 12% of all applications for government services and loans could be coming from essentially criminal organizations in those countries for a total price tag running into the hundreds of billions. And this is, as the report notes, a form of fraud that Doge seems not to have done a whole lot to look into. Maybe this is an opportunity for them to find real fraud.
Or maybe it's just art of the deal. Hey, we'll look at the look askew or aside from these ones if you give us some considerations on the international relationship stage. Well, more locally, DC is experiencing a Doge recession after years of incredible boom. is fast approaching or is in fact here. Axios has a great roundup of all of the impacts, not only DC, but the greater DC area is experiencing, especially Maryland. Maryland, the biggest number one employer is the government in Maryland. So that place radius is fairly large. Spending is down across the board. Home listings are soaring. In that case, home listings have jumped 25% year over year. Julian, maybe you'll snag a deal if you're looking for more real estate.
We'll see. We'll see. Maybe it's time to to look elsewhere if the DC area is plunging into Mad Max territory. Um, a story we mentioned in our last podcast proper with Jessica Riedel, but we just wanted to highlight one more time, is that on the 12th, Reason Magazine, my old stomping grounds, published a roundup of interviews with budget experts called Why Doge Failed. Jessica Riedel from that last podcast is one of the experts they interviewed, but it is an interesting look, through the eyes of mostly, on the right libertarian or conservative budget experts, looking at the sort of Doge experiment, mostly saying, they don't seem to have frankly done as much good as one might have hoped, if any, and kind of doing the post-mortem there, and just a reminder that it is not just pinko commie leftists like Noah who are disappointed with Doge. Also,
Not
incidentally,
even close.
Also worth just noting, if you want kind of panels of experts, the site Muckrock recently convened a kind of online panel with a bunch of experts who are in journalism and academia and elsewhere, scrutinizing Doge, including Victoria Elliott of Wired, who has been a guest on the podcast here. We'll have a link below the roundup here if you want to check that out. If you are the kind of person who is interested in watching us blab about this on WatchCats, you may also be interested in watching them blab. And speaking of previous guests on the podcast, Henry Farrell, the political science professor who we had on in our second episode, has an interesting post over on his Substack programmable mutter called Blitzscaling for Tyrants, that is looking at how Doge seems to be in a lot of ways following the kind of playbook of a popular Silicon Valley sort of business book called Blitzscaling, that's about using sort of blitzkrieg tactics to gain competitive advantage in your startup. It looks like, he notes, a lot of that playbook is being cross-applied here. This is a point also made by previous WatchCast guests, Kate Conger and Ryan Mack, who had written the book on Elon Musk's transformation of Twitter, now X, and how it is being cross-applied to government. It is a long and thoughtful essay that I will not attempt to summarize in any detail here, but just suggest checking out Henry Farrell's Substack programmable mutter for that.
Yeah, I think this is a distillation that's a must-read, so I highly recommend this one.
Excellent. And I think that is our news for the day. But Noah, I'm happy to announce, right, you are off for a overdue honeymoon trip next week. Is that right?
That is correct. So we'll be taking a little and well-deserved break next week from WatchCat activity, but we'll be busy behind the scenes getting ready to hit it again a week from this coming Monday.
Excellent. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you then on WatchCats.